Hello there everyone, I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make these simple and elegant wire macrame bracelets. Now we're using alternating square knots and then adding beads in along the way, so if you want to learn how to make it, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. First of all, the wire that I'm using is a 0.5mm silver coated copper wire, and this is going to be used for the whole bracelet. And then the beads I'm using are 3mm rounds, and in this case I'm just using two different colours. That's just because I want to kind of mix it up, but obviously you can choose whatever you want to. And then we need some findings as well, so I'm using a lobster claw clasp and extended chain and some jump rings in this case, but you could also easily make your own clasp. So you can check out the description box below the video for the material list and also any links you might need. Otherwise, let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. Then the lengths of wires that we're going to need are 4 lengths of about 50 centimeters each. Now I'm then going to be working on my mini macrame board here to make it nice and easy to make the bracelet, and I've then got all the lengths of wires and I then want to attach them together. So I've just kind of put all the ends together here so they're even and just put them in a bunch. Then all I'm going to do is put them all through the same slot and just making sure I leave a little bit of a tail. So through there, and I like to kind of bring them back through a few slots just so they don't pull through while we're working with them. Now I'm then just going to separate the wires out a little bit. So I'm going to take 2 and separate them from the others. And I'm just bringing them to each their own side. So I have one wire going towards either side, and then these other 2 here are in the middle. I'm just going to bring them straight down and then basically attach them into the opposite slot on my macrame board, just for now. So that's temporary, but we then have this as a starting point. And now what I'm going to start out doing is making a few square knots before we actually get into the pattern. So I'm going to just use these 2 wires for that. So it's the same principle as when you're using cord, but obviously the wire just reacted a little bit differently. I'm going to take my left one over first, and then I take the right one over that, bring it underneath everything in the middle and up through the loop here on the other side. And this is the first half of our first square knot. You tighten that nicely, and then we need to make the other half. So start from the opposite side, just like this, and then tighten that. So we're making square knots around the 2 holding wires. Pull that nice and tight, so we now have one complete square knot. Now what I also like to do is, because we're working with wire here, is when I've tightened my knots, every single time I don't just let go, because you can see here it kind of creates little bends on the wire. So I always run it through my hands and fingers just to kind of straighten it back out, and it also warms it up, so it makes it easier to work with. But I'm just going to make a few more square knots just so we have a little length before we actually get into the pattern itself. Now I made 4 square knots here. It's up to you how many you want to make, whether you want to make more or less than this. But now I'm going to get into the pattern itself. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I want to add a bead on either of these 2 wires that we just used. So I'm just going to add 1 bead at a time to each of them and just let them drop all the way down there. And the other one, and let that drop down. Now then what I'm going to do is release the wires that we have on the bottom of the board, so the holding wires. So I'm releasing them, and again I just like to always smooth out my wires as I go. And then we need to separate these out. So the 2 wires that were the holding wires, you're going to find where they're coming out from the knot that they kind of want to naturally go towards each their own side, so just keep them at that. So the one that's kind of sticking to the right, keep that to the right, and the left one to the left. Then I'm just separating them out a little bit like this, and then the 2 wires with the beads on, I'm going to then bring in over the 2 that were the holding wires, and kind of making sure that the beads there stay pushed up towards the knot, and just bring the wires in like this. And you can kind of push them together a little bit. So you want to make sure the beads stay in that little corner, you could say. So these wires that were brought out to the sides now and we went over are kind of holding the beads in place up there, but obviously it can still move around. But these two wires that have beads on that are brought in towards the middle now, I'm then bringing down, and they are now taking the place of the other two. So I'm putting them into the slot in the bottom of the disc where the others were before. So just like this for now. And then before we make any more knots, we also just need to add beads to the other two wires. So basically every wire is going to have one bead on it. Let that drop down. And then the other one as well. Add that and let it drop down. And then we can just maneuver a little bit, because until it's in place, you will also maybe find that the beads will want to kind of go where you don't want them to go. So for instance here, it might want to go underneath that wire a little bit. Obviously that's not what we want. So just push it back into place if you need to. But you can just kind of push it into how we want it to end up sitting. So to then fasten it in place, we basically just need to make more square knots. So we need to use the two now free wires that were the holding wires before, but now they're the outer ones, so they're the working wires, and make a square knot. So I just keep starting with the same side, and then the other one goes over that, just making your basic square knot. So doing the first half now, the first half here, I just want to do it carefully, because obviously we want this up here and the beads to stay in place. So what I like to do is making sure that it kind of sits how I want it to sit. Beads are pushed all the way up, but not in places where I don't want them to sit. And I put my fingers on there to hold it in place, while I then pull at the wires to bring it up and basically tighten the knot. You can see bringing it closer and closer until we tighten it all the way up, and we're happy with how it's going to look. And then it kind of traps all the beads in place by having the wires kind of going over and under. So that's the first half. We obviously just need to finish off this square knot by making the other half. Again, make sure everything stays in place as you're tightening that. And there we go. Now the next part here is also up to you, because it's very dependent on what your preference will be. So you can choose to just make one square knot, or you can make two, or you can make more. It's completely up to you. Now I'm going to end up making two, just to have a little bit of space between the kind of beaded sections, but also to not have too much. Like I said, that's up to you. So I'm just making another one here right below the one we just made. The exact same way. Do the other half, tighten that. And now my wires are ready to basically do this all over again. Now again, personal preference, I'm just using two different colors, so that means I'm just releasing the two holding wires from the board. That just means that I'm going to be using my other color of beads now. Again, that's completely up to you, or you can use the same ones. So I start out adding my beads to the outer wires, so one on each, and let it drop all the way down. Same on the other side. Just adding that bead and letting it drop down. And then we just need to separate out the two holding wires that we released, just a little bit like this, so we can then take the other two wires with beads on and then bring them into the middle. And basically the wires here keep swapping places throughout like this. And kind of keep swapping jobs. And then you just want to bring them together in the middle. Make sure the beads end up sitting how you want them to sit. And kind of just smooth them out as you go. Just bring that in a little bit more. And then these two wires, bring them down into the slot on the bottom where the others were. And just make sure everything is sitting nicely. Then add the beads to the other wires, one on each, just like before, let it drop down. Same with the other one. Add it and let it drop down. And then this is where we just need to make sure everything is sitting where we want it to. And the beads don't go over or under any wire that we don't want them to. It's gonna look a little something like that. And then we need to fasten it in place with a square knot. So we start that out around the two holding wires. And then just like before tightening completely, I like just making sure everything sits how I want it to, and then basically put my fingers on it to hold it in place. And then tighten that all the way up so it sits something like that. And then obviously we just need to make the other half as well. And then we have a square knot after the beaded section. Once I just tighten this, there we go. You can see there the bead just kind of pushed up a little bit, but you just push it back down and then make sure to push the wires into place, because then the wires will hold it in place now. And like I said, because I'm doing 2 square knots between each section here, I'm just going to do another one. And then you basically just want to keep repeating like this with the beaded sections until you have the length that you need. So once you made the length that you need and you reach the other end, then you just want to make sure to make the same amount of square knots as we have in the beginning. So I made, in my case here, 4. So I also just finished off on 4 square knots down here. And then once you've done that, we can then remove it from our board. So then what there's left to do is finish off the ends here. So I'm just going to show you on one end, because I'm just going to end up making a loop on either end that we can then attach our findings to. So you're going to find from the very last knot on this end here, the 2 wires the 2 working wires in this case, are coming out to kind of naturally their own side. So this one here is coming out on this top side, the other one is coming out on the other side, because you can see on the knot it has a loop kind of going across it. So we want to keep them like that. So this one on this side I'm going to bring upwards and kind of over towards the other side, and the other one I'm just going to do the same but on the other side. So just bring that kind of around the back there. Then what I want to do is get to the very end and then go down on the other side of the knot, but within the knot basically. So that little loop that's on the other side, I want to basically put the end of the wire through there. I'm just feeding it through, so it's going to end up coming out on the other side. I'm just feeding it all the way through. And you can pull it nice and tight. So basically that wire now wraps around the 2 holding wires that are coming out at the end. The same I'm going to do with the one on the other side. So I want to make sure as well that that one is nice and tight. So same principle, bring it through that loop to then come to the opposite side with it. And then just pull it all the way through so it wraps around nice and tight. And then I just want to kind of wrap them a little bit to the opposite side again. So we just get the motion going. Same with the other side. So we're just, again, continuing the wrap around those 2 wires. But I'm just going to stop now, because instead of kind of bringing them through those loops again, I now want to cut off the excess. Because these wraps are kind of finishing off these wires here. So I just want to cut off the excess close down to where the knot is coming out, or the wires are coming out from the knot. Same on the other side. Then you're going to feel that they're kind of sticking up just a little bit. You can feel that with your fingers. So you want to make sure you get your chain nose or flat nose and just squeeze them down and kind of tuck them in. And the ends are going to end up being tucked away basically within the knot. So there we go. Flatten that nicely. Those are then the working wires finished off. We now have 2 wires left that were the holding wires that come straight out at the end. So because this wire here is a little bit on the thinner side to just use one length to do a wrap loop with, what I'm going to actually do is use both of them. And to do that, I'm going to twist them together first before I make the wrap loop. So I take my chain nose or flat nose, go towards the end so I have a decent length here that I know is going to be enough to make my loop with. And then I kind of hold on to the very end of the macrame. Then I literally just start twisting and keeping hold of the wire with the pliers there. And you're going to get these two wires only just twisted together, which is obviously going to then make it so it kind of works as one. Just keep doing that until you have the twist that you want. So I'm happy with my twist, something like this. And then I'm going to take my chain nose pliers to go in and start making my wrap loop. So I put it sideways here because I then go up a little bit above the first knot. And this works just exactly the same as making a regular wrap loop. We're just using twisted wire instead. Put a bend into it, about a 90-degree bend. Then I take my 6-step bell making pliers to get a loop, and I like to use a smaller size loop when I'm just going to be attaching my findings. Place that right on the bend. You can also use round nose pliers. Bring that all the way around over the top there to make a full circle. And then put your chain nose onto the circle and then use that tail to wrap below it and basically fill in that little space that we left to begin with. And this then secures it in place. Now make sure that these wraps are going tight next to each other and not overlapping or anything. Something like that. When you're then out of space, we need to go in and cut off the excess. There we go. And then again, just make sure that we push down on the very ends of the wires so they're not sticking out, because they will then catch or scratch on clothes or skin, and obviously we want to avoid that. So just tuck them in nicely, and there you then have your wrap loop, so we can attach our findings to that. And of course you want to just do the same on the other end as well. Now what you can also do is make your own clasp with this instead. So you would still make a wrap loop. I would personally make it bigger on one end, but then on the other end is where you would make your hook end instead of making a wrap loop. So it's completely up to you. I have other tutorials where I show how to do these, and obviously again it's just using that twisted wire. So now I've done both ends, and I've also attached my findings and my clasp and my extended chain. Then we just gotta shape it. So what I'm gonna do is go in and start putting a curve into it. You can also shape it around something that has the size and shape of what you want, so a bracelet mandrel for instance. But you don't want to go into one place and just do a big bend, that'll put it out of shape. So just do a gradual curve here. You can see it's going to make the ends go closer together. And you just want to do that until you have the shape you want, and obviously we can then use the clasp. Now personally, I prefer my bracelets more oval rather than round, but that's completely up to you. And then once the ends are together enough so we can use the clasp, the bracelet is done. And we have a nice and elegant bracelet, and obviously depending what beads you use and how you mix them up can really give a nice impact as well. And this is silver wire, and then I've got the one with copper wire and other colour beads. And also just to show you the difference, whereas these two first ones are 0.5mm wire, this one here I made with 0.6mm, so you can see just a slight difference. This is a little bit, so you can say, chunkier, and then also the beads I used were 4mm instead of 3mm on these. So these are a little bit more dainty and elegant, and this is a little bit more impactful. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial for these simple and elegant wire macrame bracelets, and you can really get different results depending on what materials you choose to put together. So if you want to see more wire macrame tutorials, I have a whole playlist full of them on my channel, so you can check that out. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.